What does it mean to understand 80% of a sentence? You'll see this demonstration done online where you're given a full sentence and then the presenter will make 5% of the words in that sentence gibberish. Then they'll make 10% of the words in that sentence gibberish. Then they'll make 20% of the words in that sentence gibberish. And the goal of this is to show that just removing a small percentage of a text, just 20%, can make it much harder for you to understand the message of that text. What's going on, guys? My name's Nick. I'm the founder of a comprehensible input website called Lengualytics, and I'm a fluent speaker of the Spanish language. Now, if you're wondering why this 80% number matters, that's because 80% is thought to be the ideal comprehension level to listen to comprehensible input in your target language. Or in other words, you become fluent fastest listening to content in your target language that's about 80% comprehensible. So does this demonstration prove that that 80% number is wrong? Maybe we need something like 95%. And if we do need something like 95%, that has huge implications, because that basically means that you can only grow in fluency listening to content in your target language that you basically perfectly understand. That would be a death sentence to input-based learning, especially for beginners who already struggle to hit 60 to 70% comprehension. Let me tell you why I don't think we can draw that conclusion, and I think 80% comprehension, and even less, is a perfectly viable comprehension level for you to be listening to your target language at. If we look back to the experiment, you might notice something. We're making this assumption that understanding 80% of a sentence is the same thing as understanding 80% of the words in that sentence. But that assumption is never tested, and in my opinion, this demonstration models understanding in the wrong way. It implies that language learning is very rigid, that every word we know, we either know the word or we don't. It's a binary choice. Either we know 0% of the word or we know 100% of the word. When in reality, every word we know to a lesser or greater extent. You can think of the word melancholic, for instance. You might know what the word melancholic kind of means, but you might find it hard to distinguish that word from the word sad, based on how good your vocabulary in English is. So you could kind of think of that as understanding 100% of sad, but maybe only 90% of melancholic. And if we're talking about a kid, maybe who's 12 or 13, maybe they only know 50% of melancholic. And this is so much more obviously true when we're listening to a foreign language, because when we listen to a foreign language, we get taken back to kind of how we were when we were kids, where every word we heard was net new, and just hearing a new word one time is never enough to fully understand what that word means. So as kids, we built our vocabulary by hearing words over and over and over again in different contexts. I think the demonstration would make way more sense if we diffuse the ambiguity across every word or almost every word in the sentence, instead of focusing the ambiguity on specific words. Or maybe better said, instead of turning 20% of the words into absolute gibberish, we just make almost all the words a little less sharp. And if we do that, you'll see that the original sentence becomes a lot more readable. And I do think this is a much more accurate model for how we actually learn languages. But back when I started Spanish, I did think words were more binary. You learn words one by one. It wasn't until I reached a lower level of fluency before I really truly started to see, oh my God, this is totally true. You learn words in percentages. And of course, people who preach comprehensible input had said that to me, but it didn't click with me until I experienced it, until I got to that level where I'm like, okay, you almost have to understand words and percentages now. Because as the content gets faster, you don't have time to focus on individual words. Instead, you begin to focus on the big idea, the big picture. And once you do that, you unlock a lot of the tools that we use in our native language, like anticipation. In your native language, you're not waiting on every word to arrive before you understand a sentence. You're always predicting what's gonna come next, which is why in English, a lot of the times, two natives will just interrupt each other when we're talking because we know exactly what the other person's trying to say. It's also why I can remove from this sentence and you can still me completely perfectly. When you start thinking about the message or the big picture, you don't just get the context from the paragraph around the sentence. You get all of the entirety of the context from everything that person has said to you in their entire lives. If you're listening to content, for instance, if you're listening to a book, you'll know all the context that's happened in that book to that point. And you can use that implicitly to help you understand the message of what you're hearing now. Aside from context and anticipation, which can already get you to 10%, 30% understanding of a word, we also understand words because they're similar to other words we've already seen in the target language. We have prefixes, suffixes, and roots that all point us in some direction when we're hearing a word for the first time. And if you're doing a Romance language or German, you're going to hear so many words that you can kind of just intuit what they mean because you speak English. Like, not a lot of Spanish learners have trouble understanding the word normal, importante, exacto. Those words sound pretty obvious, even if you're just hearing them for the first time. And bundled with the visual aid of comprehensible input videos, or even just the tonality of how the person is speaking if you're watching a podcast or listening to an audiobook, a lot of words just sit at a baseline comprehension level above 0%. When I listen to Harry Potter on Audible, there's almost no words I encounter that I don't already have some kind of clue about what they mean. So this diffusion of ambiguity across entire sentences is just a way more accurate representation of what I mean when I say I understand 80% of Harry Potter. Sometimes the message might be dulled, sometimes I might be missing specific pieces, but very rarely does the big picture get fully obfuscated from me. And I think this is the hidden barrier that's not often discussed when we talk about language learning. Before you exit the beginner phase, you have to develop or relearn how to be comfortable dealing with ambiguity. That's a skill we kind of lose as adults because we're trained to avoid confusion. We're told that not understanding something means we failed and we need to stop and fix that thing immediately before we can move on. And I say relearn this skill because we already all had it. As kids, we were brought into the world knowing absolutely nothing. We spent years surrounded by speech that we did not fully understand, and we weren't bothered by it. We didn't demand clarity. We basically just accepted that we won't understand 100% of anything. As adults, before real language learning can even start, we have to rebuild that tolerance because we're entering a completely unknown environment when we jump headfirst into a new language. We have to retrain ourselves to stay engaged when things are unclear and keep listening even if we don't fully understand the message. And that's what's so difficult about language learning. I can't think of any other skill where you're given so few puzzle pieces and you're expected to kind of construct the whole picture with the small information you have. In the beginning, you're forced to operate without clarity, without feedback, without certainty. And learning only works if you're willing to stay in that state long enough for meaning to take shape. And for a lot of people, that's just very, very difficult. You have to be okay hearing a sentence like this while only experiencing the meaning like this. And if you're ready to jump in headfirst to comprehensible input content, you can find tons and tons of that on my website, Lengualytics. But if you still need reassurance, you can always click the video that's going to pop up in one of these little places on the screen. Thank you for watching.